Jungle Cruise is one of those films that as soon as I saw the advert for it, I knew I wanted to see it. I saw the trailer, I thought it looked fantastic. I didn't see it in the cinema because I'm not doing that during the pandemic, but finally it came on Disney Plus. I watched it, and I don't know whether or not it was worth the wait. It ticks every single box except for the narrative. I felt like the narrative itself was quite cliche, but the dialogue was very funny, the editing was amazing, the acting was fantastic, the scenery was absolutely gorgeous, some really beautiful distant shots. So it was fantastic to watch, aside from the thing that I normally look for in a film, and that's a gripping narrative. So this is directed by, now I'm going to mispronounce this, Collet-Serra. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And it does have a pretty amazing cast. Dwayne Johnson, Emily Blunt, Édgar Ramírez, Jack Whitehall's in it, which I didn't know about until I watched it. Paul Giamatti, really fantastic cast. But I have to say, as amazing as Emily Blunt was, Dwayne Johnson stole the film. He was absolutely incredible. The delivery of his comedic lines was just spot on beautiful. So the narrative itself, well, I'll read the description for you from IMDb. Based on Disneyland's theme park ride, where a small riverboat takes a group of travelers through a jungle filled with dangerous animals and reptiles, but with a supernatural element. It's kind of like Indiana Jones meets Walt Disney World or Disneyland. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. And it is set in the 1910s, which is something I was quite excited about. I didn't really know that until just before I started watching it when I did a little bit of research. And the costumes are beautiful. The speech, the dialogue it feels a little bit too modern at sometimes, but for the most part, you could kind of believe that this was set in the 1910s, maybe a little bit later. And Dr. Houghton, Lily, played by Emily Blunt, is going on this adventure, if you like, to try and locate this item. To be honest, I'm not very good at describing the narrative because I feel like it was all over the place. It was not very interesting. I didn't care how any of the issues were resolved, and the problems that they did face were either dull or resolved really quickly. There was no real suspense, there was no anticipation. I didn't feel any emotion about the narrative or its development, and quite frankly, I didn't care. So I enjoyed this on a scene for scene basis rather than as a whole. And I enjoyed it because of the editing, absolutely brilliant. The costumes are gorgeous. In fact, while I'm rambling about this, I will find out who did the costumes. I have a couple of people in mind for who it probably was. And as I said, Dwayne Johnson's delivery of some really fantastic lines really made my day. He was absolutely fantastic. Very dry humour, quite witty. Really enjoyed his character. Okay, costume was by Paco Delgado. I'm really bad at pronouncing names. Who also did the costumes for Les Mis, which I absolutely love. Yeah, the costumes were absolutely beautiful. The really brightly lit scenes were stunning, and the concept of the boat ride, and it worked. The film worked enough to keep me engaged, but I wasn't really motivated by the narrative itself. I was just more curious to see what would come out of Dwayne Johnson's mouth. He played Frank Wolff. So I also say I actually really like Jack Whitehall's character, MacGregor Houghton. I wasn't expecting that. So in all, it was nowhere near as good as I'd hoped. Unfortunately, I should have listened because I was looking forward to this a lot. And I had heard quite a few people saying that they'd seen it, whether in the cinema or on Disney Plus before I did, and they said it wasn't very good, or it wasn't what they'd expected. And yeah, I unfortunately feel the same way. It wasn't great. It wasn't fantastic as a narrative, but it is still decent. It is still worth watching. Maybe if you love action adventure films, you might be emotionally invested in the narrative, but for me, the pacing was all off. The problems they faced were dull, or as I said, kind of resolved in that scene. There was no suspense for me, but it had a lot of positives as well. So, if you have Disney Plus, give it a watch. Visually beautiful, but not one of the best films I've seen this year.